The Asylum of Shadows, psychological horror story. Lena Foster loved her life. Every morning, she woke up to the soft light of the sun shining through her bedroom window. Her small apartment in the city was quiet and comfortable. She had everything she needed: a steady job as a journalist, friends who cared about her, and a sense of peace that many people longed for. She worked at a local news agency where she wrote stories about events happening in the city. Most of her work was about small things: interviews with local business owners, reports on new shops opening, and articles about community events. It wasn't exciting, but it was safe. Lena didn't mind. She liked knowing what to expect each day. On weekends, she would visit the park near her apartment. She loved to sit on a bench and watch the children play. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the dogs run after sticks. It was the perfect life. Nothing strange ever happened. Everything was peaceful. But deep down, Lena felt like something was missing. There was a small part of her that yearned for adventure, for something more exciting. She wanted to write a story that would make people stop and think, a story that would make her famous. But for now, she was content, or at least she thought she was. Then, one day, everything changed. It all started with a phone call. Lena was sitting in her small kitchen, drinking her morning coffee. The sun was shining through the window, and the sound of birds singing outside made the moment feel perfect. She was about to open her laptop to start working when the phone rang. "Hello?" Lena answered, wondering who could be calling so early. "Is this Lena Foster?" The voice on the other end was deep and calm. "Yes, who is this?" she asked, her eyebrows lifting in surprise. "My name is Robert Green," the man said. "I heard you were looking for a big story." "Well, I think I can help you find one." Lena sat up straighter. "What kind of story?" There was a brief pause before Robert answered. "I have information about a place, a remote asylum. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's been around for many years, and some strange things have happened there. People say it's haunted, or worse." Lena's curiosity grew. She had heard rumors about the asylum before. It was a place where dangerous criminals were locked away, but no one ever spoke about it openly. Many people had tried to get inside, but no one had ever succeeded. "I think you should look into it," Robert continued. "It could be the story you've been waiting for." Lena felt a rush of excitement. This could be the big break she had been waiting for. "Where is it?" she asked. Robert gave her the location. It was a small town far away from the city in the middle of a thick forest. He warned her that the asylum was very old and the people there were very secretive. "But be careful," Robert added. "Some things are better left alone." Lena hung up the phone, her mind racing. She had been dreaming of a story like this. She quickly made plans to visit the asylum. She packed her bag, took her camera, and told a few friends she would be gone for a couple of days. The next morning, she set out on her journey. When Lena finally reached the asylum, the place felt strange. It was much larger than she had expected. The tall iron gates were rusty and the stone walls were covered in vines. The windows were dark, and the building seemed to be watching her. As she approached the front door, Lena noticed something unusual. The door was slightly open, as if someone had left it that way on purpose. She hesitated. Normally, she would knock first, but something inside her told her to step inside. Maybe it was the thrill of the mystery. Or maybe it was the hope of finding something truly interesting. Inside, the air was cold. The floor creaked under her feet as she walked down the narrow hallway. The walls were covered in old, peeling paint. The silence was heavy, and Lena felt a sense of unease growing inside her. She took out her camera and began to take pictures, documenting everything she saw. As she walked deeper into the building, Lena saw a man standing at the end of the hall. He was tall and thin, wearing a long white coat. He looked at her with a cold expression. "Can I help you?" he asked. Lena stepped forward, feeling both nervous and excited. "I'm Lena Foster, a journalist. I'm here to learn about the asylum. I was told there were unusual things happening here." The man didn't smile. "Dr. Harrow," he said, introducing himself. "I run this facility. What you've heard are just rumors." Lena tried to relax, but something about Dr. Harrow's voice made her feel uncomfortable. His eyes were too cold, and his smile didn't reach his eyes. She nodded and asked, "May I look around, just for a few minutes?" Dr. Harrow didn't answer right away. He stared at her for a long moment, and then said, "I suppose that's fine, but only for a short time." Lena thanked him, but as she walked past him, she noticed something strange. The hallway seemed darker, even though the light was still on. And for a second, she thought she saw something move in the shadows. A figure, a patient perhaps, but when she turned around, there was nothing there. Lena tried to shake off the feeling of unease and moved on, taking more pictures, but deep down, something was telling her that something wasn't right. The air felt thicker, heavier, and the silence around her seemed to be waiting for something to happen. Lena couldn't stop thinking about the asylum after she left. Everything had seemed fine at first. Dr. Harrow had shown her around, and the patients she saw seemed quiet and harmless. But as she lay in her small motel room that night, something kept bothering her. It was that one moment in the hallway. The dark shadow she had seen out of the corner of her eye. Lena tried to ignore it. She told herself it was just her imagination. Maybe it was a trick of the light. But the more she thought about it, the less she could believe that explanation. What was that shadow? Why had it felt like it was following her? It wasn't just any shadow, it moved in a way that didn't make sense. Shadows shouldn't move like that. It felt alive, like it was aware of her. Lena couldn't let it go. The more she tried to forget, the stronger her need to know the truth became. She picked up her camera and started looking through the photos she had taken at the asylum. Most of them were normal, just pictures of the old building and the patients. But then she saw something strange in one of the pictures. In the background, near the door of a room, there was a figure. It was hard to make out, but it looked like a person standing very still. Lena didn't remember seeing anyone there when she took the picture. It was almost like the figure had appeared after she snapped the photo. She zoomed in on the image, her heart beating faster. The figure was tall, with a dark, almost blurry outline. It was hard to tell if it was a person or just a trick of the light. But it didn't feel like a trick. It felt real. Lena spent the next few hours staring at the photo, wondering what it meant. Was it one of the patients? Had she missed something while she was walking through the asylum? She had taken so many pictures, but she didn't remember seeing anyone in that spot. The next morning, Lena couldn't focus on anything else. She skipped breakfast and went straight back to the asylum. When she arrived, the gates were closed. And the place looked even darker than before. It was as if the building itself was hiding something. The wind blew through the trees, making the branches creak. Everything felt colder. She walked toward the entrance and knocked on the door. A few moments later, Dr. Harrow appeared. His face was unreadable, but his eyes seemed to narrow when he saw her. "Back again?" he asked, his voice calm but cold. "I thought you were done." Lena tried to act casual. "I just have a few more questions. Can I look around some more?" Dr. Harrow hesitated. "I told you before, not everyone needs to know about this place." Lena ignored him. "I need to understand. I saw something yesterday. A figure in one of my pictures. It wasn't there when I took it. It was like something appeared after the shot was taken." Dr. Harrow's expression didn't change. "Your mind is playing tricks on you. This place can do that. It's old, it's lonely, and it has many secrets." Lena could feel a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean? What secrets?" Dr. Harrow didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned and walked down the hallway without saying another word. Lena followed him, trying not to show how nervous she was. She was starting to feel like there was something he wasn't telling her, something he was hiding. As they walked, Lena saw the same hallway from yesterday, the one where she had seen the shadow. Her heart began to race as she looked around. Everything looked the same, yet it didn't feel the same. It felt wrong. When they reached a room at the end of the hallway, Dr. Harrow stopped and turned to her. "This is where you should stop. You don't need to go further." But Lena was already looking past him. The door to the room was slightly open. Inside, she could see a faint movement. Something or someone was moving around in the shadows. She ignored Dr. Harrow's warning and stepped forward. The room was dark and the air was thick with dust. The floor was covered in old papers, and the walls were lined with strange drawings. But what caught her attention was the figure standing in the corner. It wasn't just a shadow this time. It was a person, or at least it looked like a person. They were standing very still. Their back to her. Lena couldn't breathe. She knew she had to move, but her feet felt like they were stuck to the floor. "Who's there?" she called, her voice shaking. The figure didn't answer. It didn't move. It was like it was waiting for her. Dr. Harrow stepped up behind her, his face grim. "You shouldn't have come here." Lena's heart raced. "Who is that? Why are they standing there?" Dr. Harrow didn't reply. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the dark room with the silent figure. Lena wanted to run, but something kept her rooted to the spot. Was this the answer she had been looking for? Was this figure the thing she had been seeing in the shadows all along? The figure didn't move, it didn't even breathe. Lena's mind raced. What was the asylum hiding? What was happening here? Why did it feel like she was being drawn deeper into something that she couldn't escape? After that day, Lena couldn't stop thinking about the figure in the room. Every moment, every thought, seemed to be connected to that shadow. Who was it? Why was it standing there, waiting for her? Her obsession grew stronger. She couldn't work. She couldn't focus on anything else. All she wanted to do was go back to the asylum. She needed to understand what was going on, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized something wasn't right. She started to feel like everyone around her was hiding something. Her friends at the news agency started to notice that she wasn't herself. They asked her if everything was okay, but Lena just nodded and said, "I'm fine." She didn't want to talk to them. She didn't want anyone to know what was happening. She didn't want to share her fear. Every night, she lay awake in bed, thinking about the asylum. The darkness in her room seemed to grow longer, and the shadows in the corners of her apartment felt more real. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound she could hear, but even that felt too loud. It was as if the world around her was pressing in, closing in. The shadows in her apartment seemed to move, just like the shadow in the asylum. She stopped meeting her friends for coffee. She stopped answering their calls. She didn't want to be around anyone. Every time someone asked her what was wrong, she told them she was just tired. But she wasn't just tired. She was afraid. Afraid that the shadow would follow her. Afraid that the asylum was reaching into her life, pulling her deeper into its darkness. Lena started to feel like she was being watched, even when she was alone. The feeling followed her wherever she went. It was like someone was behind her, just out of sight. She could hear footsteps sometimes, but when she turned around, no one was there. One afternoon, as Lena walked down the street to get some fresh air, she noticed something strange. A man across the street was staring at her. He was standing very still, his eyes fixed on her. His face was covered in shadows, but his gaze was hard and cold. Lena felt a chill run through her. She quickly turned and walked in the other direction, trying to shake off the feeling. That night, she sat in her apartment, the lights dimmed low. She kept thinking about that man, the way he had looked at her. She felt like he knew something about her. He knew about the asylum. He knew about the figure. He knew everything. But who was he? Why was he watching her? Lena couldn't escape the feeling. It was like the asylum was always there, watching her, waiting for her to come back. She tried to stop herself from thinking about it, but the thoughts wouldn't go away. Every shadow, every strange noise made her jump. It was like she couldn't trust anything around her anymore. One night, she decided to go back to the asylum. She needed to face whatever was hiding there. She packed her bag quickly, feeling a rush of fear and excitement. When she reached the gates, they were closed, just like before. But this time, she didn't hesitate. She climbed over the fence and walked toward the building. The air was thick with fog, and the trees around the asylum seemed to move in the wind. Like they were alive, she reached the front door and pushed it open. The silence inside the building was deafening. As she walked down the hallway, she could feel the walls closing in around her. She could hear the floorboards creaking under her feet, and every shadow seemed to watch her. When she reached the room where she had seen the figure before, her heart began to race. The door was slightly open. Lena's hand shook as she pushed it open, stepping inside. The room was dark, just like last time, but this time she wasn't alone. There in the corner was the figure again, standing perfectly still, just like before. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to run, but her feet wouldn't move. The figure didn't turn, it didn't speak, it just stood there, waiting. And then the door behind her slammed shut. Lena spun around, her body trembling with fear. She was trapped. The lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. Lena's heart pounded in her chest. She reached for her phone, but it was gone. She couldn't see anything. The shadows were everywhere now. The figure in the corner moved. It slowly turned its head toward her. Lena couldn't breathe. She tried to scream, but her voice was trapped in her throat. Then she heard a voice. It was soft, barely a whisper, but it felt like it was right next to her ear. "Don't leave," the voice said. Lena's skin crawled. She took a step back, but the door wouldn't open. She was stuck. "Don't leave," the voice repeated, this time louder, more urgent. Lena could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to run, but she couldn't. She was trapped in the darkness, surrounded by shadows. And the figure was moving closer. The shadows in the room seemed to grow longer. The walls seemed to close in. She felt like the asylum was alive, and it was eating her alive. Lena knew she was no longer in control. She had become part of the asylum. There was no escape. After that night in the asylum, Lena didn't know what was real anymore. She was back in her apartment, but everything felt wrong. The walls of her small room seemed to close in on her, the silence was louder than before, and the shadows were deeper. She tried to sleep, but it was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the figure. It was always in the corner of the room, standing perfectly still. Its face was hidden in darkness, but Lena could feel its eyes watching her. The more she tried to forget, the stronger the visions became. One morning, she woke up to find her apartment covered in shadows, even though the sun was shining brightly outside. The air felt cold, the light seemed to bend in strange ways. Like the world was shifting. She looked at the walls, and there were strange shapes in the shadows, shapes that looked like people. They were moving just out of the corner of her eye. Lena blinked, trying to clear her vision, but the shapes didn't disappear. They stayed there, watching her. The more she stared, the clearer they became. She saw faces, twisted and strange, smiling at her from the shadows. Lena felt her heart race. She stumbled back, knocking over a chair. The figures in the shadows didn't move, but the air around her seemed to grow thicker, heavier. It felt like the room was closing in on her. "Stop it," Lena whispered to herself. "It's just in my head." But she wasn't sure anymore. The visions were real, weren't they? She couldn't tell what was real and what wasn't. The shadows were everywhere now. They followed her through her apartment, and they whispered her name. "Lena," the whispers called. Lena grabbed her head, trying to block out the voices. She ran to the bathroom and turned on the faucet, splashing cold water on her face. She stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were wide with fear, and her skin was pale. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, and maybe she hadn't. Time seemed to blur together. Suddenly, the reflection in the mirror changed. Lena saw the figure standing behind her. Its face was hidden, but she could feel its presence. It was right there, just behind her, standing perfectly still. Lena spun around, but there was no one there. Her breath quickened. "What's happening to me?" she whispered. "What's real?" She stepped back, feeling dizzy. The walls seemed to move as if they were breathing. The shadows in the room seemed to grow longer, stretching toward her, pulling her deeper into the darkness. The more she tried to focus, the more everything twisted. The phone rang. Lena jumped, her heart pounding in her chest. She hesitated before picking it up. The voice on the other end was familiar, but it sounded wrong. "Lena," it said. "You've seen it, haven't you? You've seen the shadows." Lena's stomach twisted. "Who is this?" she asked, her voice shaking. But the person didn't answer. Instead, they whispered again. "You can't leave, Lena. You can't escape." Lena slammed the phone down, breathing heavily. She looked around the room, but everything seemed strange. The walls seemed to move. The shadows were closing in on her. The figure appeared again. This time at the edge of the hallway outside her apartment. Lena froze. It was watching her, just like before. She could feel its eyes on her. The shadow was taller now. Its shape more defined, but still, its face was hidden. Lena's heart raced. She ran to the door and flung it open, but when she stepped outside, the hallway stretched on forever. The walls seemed to go on, twisting in ways that made no sense. The lights flickered overhead, and the shadows seemed to whisper her name again. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. As she ran down the hallway, she saw the figure again. This time it was at the end of the hall, closer than before. Its movements were slow, deliberate. It was following her. Lena turned the corner and found herself back in the asylum. The place looked the same as it had the night she left. The walls were covered in old peeling paint, the floors creaked under her feet, but the air was thick, like something was choking the life out of the room. She could smell something rotten. Like old wood and decay, the figure was closer now, moving toward her. Lena tried to run, but her legs wouldn't move. It was like she was stuck in place, frozen by fear. "Don't run, Lena," the figure whispered. "You belong here. You've always belonged here." Lena shook her head. No, I don't," but her voice felt weak, as if the words were being swallowed by the shadows around her. The figure stepped forward, and Lena could see its face for the first time. It was twisted and deformed, like it had been pulled from the darkness itself. Its eyes were empty, hollow, but they stared at her with something close to hunger. Lena tried to scream, but no sound came out. The shadows pressed in around her, thick and cold. She felt herself falling into the darkness. And then everything went black. Lena woke up in her apartment, but she wasn't sure how long she had been asleep. The room felt heavy, like it was pressing down on her. Her head hurt and her body felt weak. It was hard to focus. She slowly sat up, trying to remember what had happened. Had it all been a dream? The asylum, the figure, the shadows. But when she looked around her apartment, everything felt wrong. The walls were still the same, but they looked darker. The shadows were deeper, stretching longer. The silence was louder. Then there was a knock at the door. Lena's heart jumped. She hadn't been expecting anyone. She hesitated before getting up to answer it. She didn't want to see anyone. Not today. She was too afraid of what might happen. She opened the door, and there stood Robert Greene, the man who had called her about the asylum. The man who had told her to come and investigate. "I thought I'd come check on you," Robert said with a smile, his voice calm and friendly. Lena felt a wave of confusion wash over her. How had he found her? Why was he here now? She hadn't called him. She hadn't even thought about calling him. "Are you all right?" Robert asked, noticing the fear in her eyes. "You look tired." Lena didn't know what to say. She wanted to tell him everything about the shadows, about the figure, but the words wouldn't come. She just nodded, trying to hide the fear in her voice. "I'm fine," she said, though she didn't feel fine at all. Robert stepped inside without asking. "You're not fine, Lena. I know what's been happening to you. You've been seeing things, haven't you? The shadows, the figure in the asylum." Lena froze. How did he know? She hadn't told him any of this. "Don't worry," Robert continued, his voice soothing. "You're not crazy. This place, it does things to people, it changes them." "I know. I've seen it before." Lena felt a cold chill run down her spine. She didn't know whether to trust him or not. He had been the one to send her to the asylum in the first place. He had been the one to tell her to go, to investigate. Had he known what would happen? Had he planned it all from the beginning? "You've seen it before?" Lena asked. Her voice shaking, Robert nodded slowly. "Yes, I've been watching you. I've been watching the asylum. It pulls people in, Lena. And once it has you, it doesn't let go." Lena felt her stomach twist. Something didn't feel right. He was talking too calmly. His words were too easy, but there was something in his voice that made her want to believe him. She felt like she was trapped in a web and Robert was the one pulling the strings. "I don't understand," Lena whispered. "Why me? Why did you bring me here? What do you want from me?" Robert smiled gently, but there was something cold in his eyes. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help you. I've been studying the asylum for a long time. I know what it does to people. It makes them see things, hear things. It makes them doubt themselves, but I can help you, Lena. You just have to trust me." Lena took a step back, feeling a sudden surge of fear. She didn't know what to think. She didn't know who to trust. Her mind was a mess. Was Robert trying to help her, or was he part of the asylum's game? "I don't know if I can trust you," Lena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You brought me here. You told me to go, and now I see things. I hear things." Robert stepped closer, his smile never fading. "That's exactly why you need me. You can't escape it on your own, Lena. The asylum has already taken hold of your mind. It's changing you. But I can help you break free." Lena felt a knot tighten in her stomach. It was like something was pulling at her, twisting her thoughts, making her doubt everything. She felt so confused, so lost. Was Robert really trying to help her, or was he trying to trap her in this nightmare forever? "You're the only one who can stop it," Robert said, his voice low and comforting. "You just have to listen to me. I can show you the way out. You don't have to fight anymore." Just trust me, Lena shook her head. I don't know what's real anymore. Robert reached out and gently touched her arm. His grip firm but gentle. I know this is hard, Lena, but I'm here. I won't let you fall. Trust me, you don't have to face this alone. His touch felt strangely calming. Like the darkness was being pushed away. For a moment, Lena almost felt safe. Almost. But something in the back of her mind screamed at her to run, to get away from him. Suddenly, the shadows in the room seemed to grow darker. They shifted and twisted, like they were alive, watching her. The figure from the asylum appeared in the corner of her vision, its empty eyes staring at her. Lena gasped and stepped back, pulling away from Robert. The room seemed to spin around her. The shadows were everywhere now, closing in. She could hear the whispering voices again, soft at first, then louder, echoing in her ears. Lena, the voices said, you can't escape. Her breath came fast. She could feel herself slipping, her thoughts growing more and more confused. Was Robert helping her, or was he part of the asylum's plan? Was he controlling her, pulling her deeper into the darkness? Lena turned to face him, her heart pounding. What are you doing to me? She shouted, her voice cracking. Robert's smile never wavered. I'm helping you, Lena. I'm the only one who can help you. You'll see, just trust me. Lena backed away, her mind racing. She didn't know who he was anymore. She didn't know who she was anymore. All she knew was that the shadows were closing in, and Robert was the only person there, watching her fall deeper and deeper into the darkness. Lena couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the shadows, the figure, the dark, twisted shapes that haunted her mind. She felt like she was trapped in a nightmare. And the only way out was to find the truth. She knew Robert was hiding something. He had been too calm, too smooth with his words. He had told her to trust him. But deep down, she didn't feel right. She had been following him blindly, but something inside her told her she was making a mistake. Lena decided she had to find the answers for herself. She couldn't rely on Robert anymore. She couldn't trust anyone. She had to go back to the asylum, to the place where it all started. She had to face the darkness alone. It was late when she finally arrived at the asylum again. The gates were open, just like before, and the building stood there, silent and waiting. The wind howled through the trees, and the fog seemed thicker tonight. She felt the weight of it pressing down on her, but she couldn't turn back now. She walked through the hallways, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The place was dark, and the air felt cold, like it had been forgotten for years. The shadows twisted around her, moving as if alive. Lena shivered, but she pushed forward. She had to find the truth. The room where she had seen the figure was just ahead. Lena hesitated for a moment, but then she took a deep breath and opened the door. The room was just as dark as she remembered, but this time there was something different about it. It felt more alive, more dangerous. She stepped inside, her eyes searching the shadows. The air was thick with fear, and the walls seemed to be closing in around her. Then she saw it. The figure was there, standing in the corner, just like before, but this time it wasn't still. This time it moved. The figure turned its head slowly, and Lena's heart stopped. It wasn't just a shadow. It was a person, a woman, or at least it looked like one. Her face was hidden in darkness, but Lena could feel her eyes burning through her. Who are you? Lena whispered, her voice shaking. The figure stepped forward, moving in slow, deliberate steps. It was like the shadows were part of her, following her every movement. Lena tried to back away, but her legs wouldn't move. She was frozen, trapped in the darkness. You found the truth, the figure whispered, her voice low and cold. But you don't understand it yet. Lena's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? What is this place? What is happening to me? The figure stepped closer. Lena could feel its presence, like it was inside her head. This asylum is a prison, Lena. Not for the patients, but for the ones who come here looking for answers. The shadows are part of it. They feed on your fear. They take what you love, what you need, and twist it until there's nothing left. Lena's eyes widened. No, I don't believe you. This can't be real. The figure laughed softly. You believe the asylum is the only thing trapping you, but you are already trapped, Lena. You have always been trapped. Lena shook her head, trying to make sense of the words. The shadows swirled around her, and for a moment, she thought she saw something else. Robert's face, twisted and broken, staring at her from the darkness. No, Lena whispered. No, this can't be happening. The figure stepped even closer. You were never meant to leave. Robert brought you here for a reason. He's one of us. He's been waiting for you, Lena, waiting for you to fall. Lena's eyes darted around the room, and the walls seemed to close in on her. The air grew colder, and the shadows pressed tighter. She could feel the truth starting to settle in her chest. But it was too horrible to accept. You're part of the asylum, Lena whispered, her voice barely a sound. You're trapped too. The figure's smile grew wider, colder. Yes, but I am not like you. I have learned how to feed the shadows, how to become one with them. You, Lena, are still weak. You can't see what's real anymore. Lena's heart raced. She wanted to run, but her feet wouldn't move. The figure's words were like chains, holding her in place. You can't escape this, the figure said softly. It's already inside you. Lena closed her eyes, trying to block out the figure's voice, trying to block out the truth. But the more she tried to escape, the more it pulled her in. The shadows were everywhere now, wrapping around her like a suffocating blanket. She opened her eyes again, and everything was different. The asylum was gone. The walls had disappeared, and she was standing in the middle of a vast, endless darkness. The shadows stretched on forever. And the figure was still there, watching her with its empty eyes. No, Lena whispered, tears filling her eyes. This can't be real. The figure reached out a hand. It is real, Lena. It's always been real. Lena felt the coldness of the figure's hand as it touched her arm. The shadows twisted around her, and she felt herself being pulled into the darkness. And then she understood. The asylum wasn't just a place. It was a part of her. It had always been inside her, feeding on her fear, on her doubts. The shadows had never left. They were always there, waiting for her to find them. Lena's mind snapped. She could feel herself breaking apart, losing everything she once was. The darkness swallowed her whole. Lena felt trapped in the darkness. Her mind was spinning, and the shadows wrapped around her tight and cold. The figure was still there, standing close by, watching her. She could hear its voice in her head, but it wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was loud, echoing in her thoughts. "You're part of this now, Lena," the figure said. Its voice was like ice, freezing her heart. "You can never leave. You belong to the asylum. You belong to the shadows." Lena felt her body tremble. Her heart was beating so fast. It felt like it was going to explode. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but she couldn't. The shadows were everywhere, inside her, around her. She couldn't escape. It was all too much. But then, just as she was about to give up, something inside her stirred. A memory, a small spark of light. She remembered why she came here in the first place. She had come to find the truth, to uncover the secrets of the asylum. She had wanted to know what was happening, to understand the shadows, and now she knew too much. But the truth wasn't what she thought it would be. Lena looked at the figure, her eyes wide with fear. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice shaking. "What am I supposed to do now?" The figure smiled, a twisted, empty smile. "You already know what you must do. You must choose. You can join us, Lena. You can become one of us. You will be free from the pain, from the fear. You will be powerful." Lena felt her mind swirl with confusion. She knew what the figure was saying was wrong, but there was a part of her that wanted to listen. The shadows were pulling at her, promising freedom, power, and peace. All she had to do was give in. But what about the people she loved? What about her life? What would happen to them if she chose the shadows? Could she live with the guilt of hurting others? Suddenly, Lena thought about Robert. She thought about how he had come to her apartment, how he had said he was helping her. But now, she wasn't sure. Was he really trying to help? Or was he just like the shadows, leading her deeper into this nightmare? She thought about her family, her friends. They were all far away, unaware of what was happening to her. If she gave in to the shadows, would they ever be safe again? Would the darkness spread to them too? Could she ever go back to the life she had before? Tears filled Lena's eyes. The weight of the decision pressed down on her chest like 1,000 stones. She didn't want to hurt anyone. She didn't want to be trapped in the darkness forever. But the shadows were so strong. They promised to take away her pain, to end her suffering. She could feel the pull, like they were calling her name. Lena took a step back, trying to think clearly. But everything was spinning. Her thoughts were tangled, caught in a web of fear and doubt. She wanted to run, to escape, but the shadows were everywhere. They were part of her now. She could feel them inside her, wrapping around her like chains. But still, she couldn't give up. Not like this. She couldn't let the shadows win. She couldn't let them take everything from her. "Please," Lena whispered, "I don't want this. I don't want to be part of this." The figure stepped closer, its cold hand reaching for her. "It's too late, Lena. You are already part of us. There is no escape." Lena's heart pounded in her chest. She looked around at the swirling shadows, the twisted shapes, the endless darkness. It felt like the whole world was closing in on her, but she couldn't let it win. She couldn't let the shadows take everything. She thought about Robert again. Was he truly a part of this darkness? Had he been using her, like the shadows had used him? Or was there still a chance to save herself, and maybe even him? Lena closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. The decision was hers. She could give in to the shadows, let them take her, and live in the darkness forever. Or she could fight, even if it meant giving up the only thing that was keeping her safe. But could she really fight? Could she really win against something so powerful? Or was she already too far gone? Lena opened her eyes and looked at the figure, now standing right in front of her. It was waiting, watching, expecting her to choose. But instead of reaching out for it, Lena took one last, desperate step back. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "I won't let you win." In that moment, Lena made her choice. Lena stood still in the darkness, her heart pounding in her chest. The figure was right in front of her, its cold presence pressing against her. The shadows moved around her, whispering, pulling at her thoughts. She could feel the weight of the decision on her shoulders. The darkness was everywhere. But she couldn't give in, not like this. She wouldn't let it win. "I won't let you control me," she said, her voice shaking but firm. She took one more step back, away from the figure, away from the shadows. But the darkness wasn't finished with her. The figure's cold laugh echoed in her ears. "You think you can escape?" it whispered. "You think you can leave? You've already made your choice, Lena. It's too late." Lena's breath caught in her throat. The shadows were growing stronger, swirling around her, pressing in from all sides. She could feel them, like hands reaching for her, pulling her deeper. She wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. Suddenly, she heard a voice she knew. "Lena." It was Robert. Lena's head snapped up. She saw him standing in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. He reached out to her, his voice shaking. "Lena, you have to come back. This isn't you. You don't belong here." The figure in front of Lena hissed, its form twisting and changing, becoming more and more monstrous. It stepped forward, blocking the doorway, blocking Robert. "You can't save her," it said, its voice deep and twisted. "She is ours now." Lena's heart raced. She wanted to reach out to Robert, to go to him, to escape the nightmare. But the shadows were everywhere now, holding her in place, pulling her back. She couldn't move, she couldn't breathe. Robert stepped forward, his eyes filled with panic. Lena, please, I can help you. I know how to stop this. You don't have to go with it. But the shadows closed in, swirling faster and faster, and Lena felt herself falling. She was slipping, sinking into the darkness. She could feel herself losing control, her thoughts fading. Her sense of reality slipping away. Just as the darkness closed in around her, she heard Robert's voice again, louder this time, desperate. Lena, fight it. You can fight it. Don't let it win. But the shadows were too strong. They were inside her now, pulling her deeper. She reached out, her hand trembling, but there was nothing to grab, no way to stop it. Then, with one final, overwhelming rush of cold and darkness, Lena felt herself disappear into the shadows. The world around her went silent.